Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
I didn't expect to hear from him. Not like this. The message buzzed through the silence of the ambulance as I drove down the empty road between calls. I glanced down, caught off guard by the name on the screen. It was from Dad. The message was short, harsh. Return home to care for your mother or lose your inheritance. I scoffed, shaking my head. The audacity. After everything, he thought I'd drop everything and come back? For what? So he could control me some more? I glanced at the rearview mirror, more annoyed than anything. I knew my dad had a way of twisting things, but this felt like the final straw. He was using my mother's illness against me now. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how easily he thought he could force me back. I shoved my phone in my pocket and turned my attention back to the road. There were calls to make, patients to care for, and I couldn't afford to let this get to me. I'd been through too much for too long to let him dictate anything. Still, the words stuck with me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. What kind of man does that? What kind of father? Was he really that convinced I would bend? I didn't know. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of getting a rise out of me. I pulled over when we got to the next call, barely noticing the faces around me. I checked vitals, directed my partner, kept everything moving. I didn't let my emotions show. I couldn't afford to, not now. But the message was still there, hanging like a weight in my chest. By the time I got back to the station, I was fuming. I pulled out my phone, still fuming. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. I typed one word, two. A cold, definitive answer. It was all I needed to say. I didn't need his money. I didn't need his approval. I needed my own space, my own life. The message sent. That was that. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and turned my focus to the next task at hand. I wasn't going back. And he could keep his inheritance. I grew up in a house where silence spoke louder than anything else. The walls of our small brick home in rural Pennsylvania had a way of holding all the things we didn't say, especially when it came to my father. Richard Reynolds was the kind of man who demanded respect without ever having to ask for it. He never raised his voice unless it was to tell someone they weren't doing things right. And in our house, that was everyone except Jake. Jake could do no wrong. He could wreck the family car, again, and still get the keys to a new one the next day. He could skip school for weeks, show up late to everything, and somehow Dad never saw it as anything more than a boy being a boy situation. He was the golden child, the heir to everything. The construction business, the attention, the respect. And I was the afterthought, the support role, the one who held the fort together while everyone else got to live their lives. I remember once, maybe I was 15, I came home with straight A's on my report card, the kind of achievement you didn't see often in a house like ours. I was proud of myself, but when I showed Dad, he barely glanced at it. Girls don't need to be smart to succeed, he said, like it was a fact, like I'd wasted my time. I remember feeling my stomach sink as his words landed, cold and final. That was my place in the world. Good enough for chores, good enough to help out when Jake was off messing up, but never good enough to dream. I didn't even know what to say to that. It wasn't worth arguing. Arguing only made things worse. Mom never said much, never interfered. She was there, always, making dinner, folding laundry, making sure everything ran smooth. I used to wonder if she was afraid of Dad or just too tired to fight him. Maybe both. She didn't stand up to him. Not for me, not for anyone. But every now and then, when things got particularly bad, she'd give me a look. One of those looks that said, "I see you." That was about as much support as I ever got from her. But it was something. Jake was the star, and I was the background. Even when I tried to step outside of that role, it never went well. I wanted more. I wanted to do something for myself. But what I got was Dad's scorn. The day I told them I wanted to go away for paramedic training was the day the last thread of any hope of approval snapped. Dad went ballistic. "You're throwing your life away," he'd yelled, his face red. "Paramedic? That's a man's job. You're supposed to be home, helping your mother and brother." I stood there, my bags packed in the hallway, and told him, "I'm leaving, Dad. I'm going." His jaw clenched. "You're not welcome here if you leave." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. "Fine, I'll go." Mom stayed quiet as usual, but I saw her eyes. She wasn't happy, but she wasn't surprised either. I could tell she didn't know what to say, how to fix it. Not this time. I didn't look back as I walked out the door, but I knew I'd never get that approval. That was the end of it. So I left. I went to the city, found the paramedic training program, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally doing something that mattered. I never regretted it, not even for a second. Back then, I didn't care about the business, the house, or any of that. I wasn't about to keep playing second fiddle to Jake. If Dad couldn't see my worth, I didn't need his approval anyway. After I left for paramedic training, my family didn't just stop supporting me, they cut me off entirely. It was as if I'd never existed. I'd expected the silence, but it was still hard to get used to. My mother, who'd once sent me those quiet, knowing looks, stopped writing. I heard nothing from her for months. And then one day there was a letter. The paper was thin, the handwriting familiar, but the words were different. She'd written about her illness, the chemotherapy, the endless doctor visits, and how hard it was to keep up with everything. But she never once mentioned Richard, not once. Instead, she talked about how proud she was of me, how I was doing what she'd always dreamed of. It felt like a lifeline thrown from a distance I could never cross. A few weeks later, I got the call that she passed. No surprise there. But the real punch came a couple months after that, when Jake tried to reach out. "Hey, Maya," he said, voice flat and calculating over the phone. "Just wondering if you've seen any of Mom's stuff. Some of it's worth money, you know? Don't want it going to waste." I could hear the rustle of papers in the background. He wasn't calling to check in on me or offer any condolences, just asking about whatever assets she might have left behind. I wasn't stupid. "No, Jake," I replied, my voice cool. "I haven't seen anything." I wasn't about to get caught up in whatever scheme he was planning. The rest of the call went the same way. He asked about the house, about the life insurance policy, and then hung up when I didn't bite. It was the same thing every time. Empty conversations with no real connection. I didn't need them. I was fine without them. The silence from home grew louder over time, but it didn't matter much. I had my work, and that was enough. My shift partners, people who knew me for who I was and not for what I could be to them, they were my family now, my real family. They didn't judge, didn't try to hold me back. They had my back when shit hit the fan, when lives were on the line, when everything felt like chaos. And chaos was something I was used to. Every call, every emergency brought something new. I remember one night, we were called out to a car accident on the highway. The guy was bleeding out, his chest crushed in ways that made even seasoned paramedics cringe. But it didn't faze me. I worked like I had 100 times before, keeping him stable until we got him to the hospital. My hands were steady, my mind clear. I didn't think about my father or my brother or any of the pain they had caused. It was just me, my team, and the patient. And that was enough. The only thing I had left from my mother was a small life insurance payout. It wasn't much, but it was a reminder that she hadn't entirely forgotten me. But it didn't feel like anything I could use to rebuild a relationship with her or with anyone back home. I wasn't about to reach out to them, not after everything. So I stayed away. I built a life far from Pennsylvania, far from their control, from their expectations, from all the years of being dismissed. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that was more than I ever had with them. In the end, I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I used to be. I was just done. I had enough of trying to fit into their mold, trying to be the person they wanted me to be. What I had now, the respect of my colleagues, the work I loved, that was everything. It was late. I was halfway through a shift when the email came through. The subject line made my blood run cold. Update on estate, immediate action required. My gut twisted before I even opened it. I knew it wasn't good. I clicked it open, and the message from my father's lawyer hit me like a slap. "Dear Ms. Reynolds," it began, "we are writing to inform you that your father's will has been updated. Per recent discussions, Mr. Reynolds has decided that the family estate should be settled. The situation with your brother, Mr. Jake Reynolds, has become urgent. He has stated that unless you return to Pennsylvania to oversee your mother's house and the estate, he will proceed with selling the property." I read it again, slower this time, but the words didn't change. The message went on with the usual formalities, but my mind was already racing. Jake had been planning this for who knows how long. He was going to sell the house, the one I grew up in, the one my mother had kept alive despite everything. And now he was using it as leverage to drag me back into their world. And the ultimatum at the end of the email, the part that finally made me sick to my stomach, failure to return and comply will result in your complete disinheritance. All financial ties to the estate will be severed. I slammed the phone down on the table, my hands trembling with anger. I could feel the weight of it all. The years of their control, the years of Jake's manipulation. And now this. This final, desperate attempt to bring me back into their orbit, I was furious, but underneath it, there was something else: disappointment. Deep, deep disappointment in myself for ever thinking there might have been a chance to fix things. I'd spent years building a life away from them, trying to find some peace, some autonomy. And here they were, reaching out from the past with a simple demand that said everything I needed to know. I didn't matter unless I played by their rules. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but I couldn't even muster the energy. Instead, I spent the rest of the night fuming, pacing the tiny paramedic station kitchen. I thought about the words I'd read, thought about how they never saw me for who I was, only what I could do for them. I thought about Jake, always the golden child, always the one who got whatever he wanted, while I had to fight for scraps. I sat down, trying to breathe, but the anger still burned hot. My thoughts kept circling back to the same question: why did I ever care? Then, as if the answer had been sitting in the back of my mind the whole time, I reached for my phone again. My thumb hovered over the screen, and I realized what I had to do. I opened the email again, typed one word into the response box, and hit send. 2. It was simple. It was cold, but it was definitive. I wasn't going back. Not for the house, not for the money, not for anything. I wasn't going to let them play me anymore. I didn't need their inheritance. I didn't need their approval. What mattered was my independence, the life I had built without them. The people who respected me for who I was, not because of what they thought I owed them. The message was out there, sent into the void. And for the first time in years, I felt a weight lift off my chest. They had no more power over me. The sirens screamed in my ears, the flashing lights painting the road in strobe-like bursts as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing through the chaos of the call. A major car crash on Route 12, multiple injuries. Tara was on the scene with me, and I could feel the tension in her voice when she called it in. Multiple trauma, looks like a head-on, get us here, quick. I glanced at Tara, focused and steady, as we sped toward the wreckage. I could see her knuckles white around the sidearm of her kit, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion that always hung on her. She was solid, always had been. One of the newer paramedics, but she had more heart than most. We pulled up to the scene in under 5 minutes, the smell of burning rubber and metal thick in the air. A sedan was crumpled into the front end of a pickup truck, twisted and mangled beyond recognition. Tara was already moving, her boots crunching on gravel, making her way toward the wrecked car. I hopped out of the ambulance, already focused. My mind automatically flicked into work mode, pushing everything else aside. The weight of the ultimatum from my father still hung on me like a dark cloud, but I couldn't afford to let it control me now. The injured driver was a mess. Broken leg, blood pooling around his torso. Tara was crouched by the other side of the car, checking the condition of the passenger. Her face dropped. I rushed over. "Tara?" I said, my voice tight with sudden urgency. "What's going on?" "I think her leg's crushed," Tara replied, her hands shaking just slightly as she checked the woman's pulse. "We need to move fast. Her leg's going to need immediate intervention or we'll lose it." Tara's usual calm was breaking. I saw the panic in her eyes, something she usually kept under wraps. I felt a surge of protectiveness, something I hadn't let myself feel in years. The thought of losing her leg, of losing someone I worked with, someone I cared about, made my stomach turn. "Hey, stay with me, okay?" I said, kneeling beside Tara, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Let's get her out of here first. We'll deal with the rest on the road." Tara nodded, her breath shallow but steadying as she adjusted her grip. She didn't even look up as I worked with her to stabilize the patient. The whole situation felt like it was moving in slow motion, but I kept pushing through, focused. I kept thinking, don't lose it, don't fall apart, not here, not now. The rest of the crew helped get the woman into the back of the ambulance, and we sped off to the hospital. The air was thick with the sounds of oxygen masks, beeping monitors, and the rush of our thoughts all tangled together in the cramped space. I could hear Tara's breathing, ragged but steady now, and it kept me grounded. As we neared the hospital, I glanced at Tara. Her face was pale, and the usually sharp glint in her eyes was dulled by exhaustion and fear. I could see the edges of her nerves, just barely hanging on. "You're doing great," I said, trying to reassure her, but the words felt hollow. Tara had saved my ass more than once. I should have been the one to take some of the weight off her. When we finally rolled up to the emergency room, I felt the same strange mix of relief and dread that I always did when a call was over. Relief that we got her there. Dread that the outcome might not be what we hoped. As Tara was wheeled away for surgery, I lingered, watching as the hospital staff took over, hooking her up to more machines. She was stable for now, but it wasn't over yet. I stepped outside to take a breath, the weight of everything from the night settling back on me. My father's ultimatum was still echoing in my head. The years of isolation, the constant reminder that I wasn't enough in their eyes. My mind went back to that message: come back or lose everything. They couldn't see me. They never had. I was just a pawn in their game. But out here, in the mess of life and death, in the dirt and grit of my work, I mattered. Tara mattered. My team mattered. They didn't care about my family's control or their money. They cared about who I was now, who I had become, and that was more than I'd ever gotten from my blood. I stood there for a long moment, feeling the night air press against me. There were no more phone calls from Dad, no more manipulation from Jake. I wasn't going back to that. Not for anyone. I let out a breath, silent and sure. My true family wasn't the one I'd been born into. It was the people I worked with, the people who understood what loyalty and respect really meant, and I wasn't about to let my father or my brother pull me back into that cycle of control again. Tara was my focus now. I had my priorities straight. This was the life I chose. This was where I belonged. I was finishing up paperwork when my phone buzzed again. At first, I didn't even bother to look. Another text from my father's lawyer, probably. Or maybe another shallow message from Jake about the estate. I had learned to tune them out, but something about this call felt different. It was him. Richard. I stared at the screen for a moment, my pulse picking up before I answered. Hello? His voice on the other end was weak, fragile almost, a far cry from the commanding tone he used when I was growing up. Maya, he said, his words slow, deliberate. I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I'm getting old. Your mother's gone, and I need someone to take care of things, the house, the estate. I can't do it all on my own. I clenched my jaw. I'd expected something like this, but hearing it out loud hit differently. The manipulation was obvious. He was trying to guilt me, trying to pull me back into his world with the same old line. Your family, you're supposed to help. Dad, I said, my voice calm but firm, I've made my decision. I'm not coming back. I'm not going to play this game anymore. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long silence. Then his voice cracked, just barely. You're being selfish, he said, his words filled with that familiar venom. You're abandoning your family for nothing. You'll regret this, you know? You'll regret turning your back on us. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Selfish. That word. I had heard it so many times growing up, tossed at me whenever I didn't meet his expectations. It was never about what I wanted. It was always about what he wanted. I took a slow breath, my hands tight on the edge of the table. No, Dad, I won't regret it. I've spent my whole life trying to meet your standards, trying to be what you wanted, but I'm not doing it anymore. Not for you, not for Jake, not for anyone. I'm done being your pawn. His breathing was shallow now, like the weight of my words had crushed him. You think you're better than us? You think you found some life worth living without us? I let that sink in for a moment, feeling a bitter laugh rise in my throat. I think I've found a life where I matter, where I'm respected for who I am, not for what you think I should be. I heard him grunt, and I could picture him standing there, face twisted, fists clenched like I always saw him when he was furious. But this time, it didn't scare me. I wasn't scared of him anymore. Maya, he started again, the weak tremor in his voice gone, replaced by something colder. You won't have anything without us. You're nothing without your family. You'll never amount to anything. The words stung, but only for a second. The truth was, I already knew I wasn't anything to him, not to them. All those years of working harder than Jake, all those years of being overlooked, of being dismissed. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everything I had worked for, everything I had built without them. I don't need your money, Dad. I don't need your approval. I'm not coming back. I'm done. I didn't wait for him to say anything more. I hung up before he could get another word in. It wasn't just about the phone call. It was everything that had led up to it. The years of trying to prove myself, to earn something that would never come. The silent rejection from my mother, the way she always sided with him, even when she didn't speak. I was always the one who had to take the scraps while Jake got everything handed to him. And now, this, his last desperate attempt to pull me back into the fold, to make me bend to his will. I didn't owe him anything, not anymore. The phone call was over, but the weight of it still sat in my chest, a reminder of the past I was trying to escape. But I knew what I had to do now. It wasn't just the phone call that ended things, it was everything I'd put up with before. The lies, the manipulation, the false hope that things might be different. I sat down at my desk, pulled up my bank account, and started making arrangements. I called my bank, told them to close the account linked to my father's estate. I called my lawyer, told them to make sure his name was removed from my emergency contacts. Every tie that connected me to them, every string they tried to pull, I was cutting it. I wasn't going to be his backup anymore. I wasn't going to be anyone's fallback. It was time to build a future that wasn't tied to the past. The finality of it hit me, but it felt right. There was no more looking over my shoulder, no more second guessing myself. I had made my choice. And for the first time, I knew it was the right one. A month had passed since I cut ties with my father, since I made the decision to stop letting his manipulation rule my life. I had packed up and moved forward, building my new world piece by piece. But there was one thing I hadn't done: face the place that shaped me. I drove the familiar roads of my hometown, not with the intention of rekindling anything with my family, but to confront the reality of my past. The house I grew up in was long gone, sold off like everything else. The whole neighborhood had changed. The old diner on the corner had been replaced by a strip mall, and even the park where I used to hang out with friends felt different, like it belonged to someone else now. I reached the block where our house used to sit, and I slowed the car to a stop. The lot was empty, the grass overgrown, and the foundation of the house was barely a memory. All that remained was a sense of loss, a ghost of something that used to mean something to me. I felt the weight of everything: my father's demands, the empty promises, the years spent in that house, fighting to prove I was enough. And now there was nothing. The house was gone. My mother was gone, and I hadn't looked back until now. I was about to drive away when I noticed something on the curb: a figure hunched over, his clothes ragged, mismatched. The way he sat with his shoulders slumped, head bowed, I thought for a moment it could be anyone. But then I saw his face. It was him, my father. The man who had once towered over me, commanding and cold, now sitting broken and alone on the side of the road. His once proud posture was gone, replaced by something that resembled defeat. He didn't even look up when I slowed the car, just kept his eyes down, staring at the cracked pavement as if he were invisible. I stayed there for a moment, parked across the street, staring at him. The man who had disowned me. The one who thought I'd always come back when he called. The one who tried to break me, to control me, who couldn't even see me for who I was. I didn't feel pity, not for him, not after everything. There was no sadness in me, no sense of loss. I didn't feel anything that resembled compassion. All I felt was a cold recognition. He was broken, yes, but not in the way I thought he'd be. I had expected something grander, more dramatic. I had expected him to be some sort of tragedy. But now, seeing him like this, I realized he was exactly what I thought he was: a man who couldn't handle the consequences of his actions. And as I sat there, watching him, I realized something else. He wasn't my responsibility. I wasn't the one who had walked away from this. I wasn't the one who had abandoned everything and everyone for control. That had been him, not me. The strange thing was, I felt relief. It wasn't the relief I thought I'd feel when I walked away from him, but something deeper. The feeling of being free from the chains he'd wrapped around me for so long. Free from the idea that I owed him something. Free from the guilt of not being who he wanted me to be. I sat there for another minute, not speaking, not trying to make sense of what I was supposed to do next. In the end, I just shook my head, put the car back in gear, and drove away. I didn't look back. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't even about closure. It was about knowing that I had made the right decision, about knowing that the man who had held me back, who had pushed me away, had no hold over me anymore. As I drove through the streets, past the places I once thought I could never leave, a sense of peace settled in. This town, this life, wasn't mine anymore. I wasn't tied to it by guilt or obligation. I wasn't even tied to the house that had once been my home. I was free, and it felt fucking good. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. No more games, no more manipulation, no more holding on to what was never mine to begin with. I had made my choice, and now I was living it. No regrets, no looking back. I hadn't planned on going back to the courthouse, but something about the whole situation with my father and Jake gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, that I wasn't seeing the full picture. I needed answers. The courthouse was quiet when I walked in, the smell of old paper and wood lingering in the air, familiar and cold. It felt like a place where secrets were kept, and right now, That's exactly what I was looking for. Secrets. I approached the clerk's desk and asked for records on the Reynolds estate. My father's name, my brother's name, everything they'd filed. The clerk looked at me, a little wary, but pulled the documents without asking too many questions. A few minutes later, I was holding a stack of papers thicker than I expected, and a knot tightened in my stomach as I sifted through them. That's when I saw it, the forged documents. Jake had sold off the family assets while their father was under medical sedation. I blinked, rereading the words on the paper, making sure I wasn't seeing things. It was all there. The signatures that weren't his, the sale of properties that had been in our family for decades. Jake had stripped it all away while my father was out cold, probably unaware of what his son was doing behind his back. I felt a rush of disgust mixed with anger. My father had always been the one pulling the strings, controlling everything, but Jake had taken it a step further. He'd been playing a different game entirely, and he'd used my father's decline to line his pockets. It wasn't just greed, it was calculated, cold, manipulative, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I walked out of the courthouse with the stack of documents in hand, my mind racing. I didn't care about the money. I hadn't cared about that for years. What I cared about was exposing the control they had tried to maintain over me, over everything. My mother, too, had been a victim of it all. I could see her now, standing by silently as Jake pulled the rug out from under everything that should have mattered to us. It wasn't about reclaiming the property or even the inheritance anymore. This was about justice. This was about making sure that Jake and my father were held accountable for what they had done, not just to me, but to my mother, too. I drove straight to a lawyer's office, ready to take the next step. I didn't need to shout or make a scene. I didn't need to throw punches. What I needed was to play this right. Quiet, methodical, deliberate. The lawyer's office was as sterile as the courthouse. Clean, too clean. The kind of place where business got done, but no one ever really felt at home. I sat across from a middle-aged man in a suit who barely glanced at me as he flipped through the papers I'd handed him. "You've got a solid case," he said after a moment, his voice impassive. "Forgery, asset mismanagement. You can file for a reversal of the sales and possibly some damages, but it won't be quick." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. This wasn't going to be a quick fix, and it wouldn't be easy. I'd been up against harder fights in my life, though, and this was no different. "We'll need to go through the whole process carefully," he continued. "You've got the documents, but we'll need witnesses, some testimony to make sure we get the full picture. If you want to go through with this, it's going to take time." "I'm ready," I said, and my voice surprised me. It was steady, calm. But underneath it, there was a fire. This wasn't just a fight for what was taken from me. It was a fight to expose everything they'd hidden, everything they'd kept from me and my mother. They thought they could control me, break me, and leave me with nothing. They were wrong. We spent the next hour discussing the process. It wasn't going to be flashy or loud. I wasn't going to get some dramatic moment of victory in the court of public opinion. This wasn't about sweeping gestures. It was about taking steady steps, getting the right people on record, letting the truth speak for itself. As I walked out of the office, the documents tucked into my bag, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to my family's demands. I wasn't on the defensive anymore. I was doing this on my terms. I knew my father wasn't going to be held accountable in any traditional sense. He'd never admit to his part in any of this. But the law, the courts, they could expose Jake's manipulation, and that would be enough. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure that everything they tried to take from me didn't stay in their hands. The road ahead would be long. There would be battles, and there would be delays, but I was ready for it. This was my fight now, and I wasn't going to back down. Not anymore. Months passed, and the case slowly unfolded. There were delays, small victories, and setbacks. Every time I thought we were close to a resolution, there was another round of paperwork or a new tactic from Jake's lawyer, but I didn't let it rattle me. I stayed focused, pushing through each step like a paramedic on a call. Quick, decisive, steady. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that Jake's manipulation had been deeper than I had originally thought. The forged signatures, the falsified documents, the way he'd used my father's sedation to seize control, it was all there. Little by little, we chipped away at his fraud, and the court began to see what I had already known. Jake had taken advantage of a man too proud and too stubborn to realize he was being used. And then finally, the verdict came. The assets were returned to my mother's estate, the fraudulent sales voided. Jake and my father were exposed for everything they'd done, Though, true to form, neither one took responsibility. My father never admitted to anything, but it didn't matter. The truth had been laid bare. I didn't feel the rush of triumph I thought I would. There was no joy in seeing them taken down. It wasn't about that. It had never been about that. I didn't care about the money or the properties or the houses. What mattered was standing up for myself, for my mother, for the years I had spent in silence and submission. What mattered was breaking free from their control. The final blow came at a public meeting, just after the case was closed. I had been asked to speak on what had happened. The community had always known the Reynolds family as the ones who ran things around here, the ones everyone respected or feared. But they didn't know the truth, not really. So I spoke. I told them about the manipulation, about the lies, and about how everything I had done had been to prove I was worth something, when all I'd really needed was to prove it to myself. I spoke of the years of silence, of being pushed aside, of not having a voice. I shared my story with the same blunt honesty I had used to get through all of it. And then, in the end, I reminded them, and myself, that real strength doesn't come from bending to someone else's will. It doesn't come from being small so others can feel bigger. Real strength comes from choosing who you want to be, no matter who tries to break you down. I could feel their eyes on me, but I didn't look for approval. This wasn't for them. It was for me. When I left the courthouse that day, the weight of it all settled in. It was done. The chapter with my family, with the lies and the manipulation, it was over. I had fought for myself, and I had won. But what I carried with me was not just the victory in the court, but the sense of liberation. I was finally free to move forward. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back.